Over the past 9 months, the royal family has faced isolation, uncertainty, and growing tension behind palace walls. But the private conversation that finally brought Catherine to tears has only now come to light. According to Princess Anne, the most shocking part was not simply what Queen Camilla allegedly said. It was a fact that those remarks had been circulating behind Catherine's back for months, while everyone continued smiling beside her in public. The words Camilla never expected Catherine to hear were repeated by Princess Anne during a private meeting inside Windsor Castle. As Anne spoke, the room fell silent. William froze in place. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, and she instinctively raised a hand to her mouth. But Anne wasn't finished. She revealed that the comments were not isolated remarks made in anger. Instead, they reflected a pattern that had quietly developed behind closed doors. With every sentence, William's concern deepened, and he demanded to know how long these conversations had been hidden from both Catherine and the king. According to Anne, the true betrayal wasn't simply that Camilla disliked Catherine. It was that she had continued treating her warmly in public while privately questioning her future within the monarchy. The meeting had originally been scheduled as a routine discussion about upcoming royal duties, public engagements, and the monarchy's image. Catherine entered the room, believing it would be another ordinary planning session. Instead, Anne quietly closed the folder in front of her, looked directly at Catherine, and said there was something she could no longer keep to herself. What followed was far more serious than an ordinary family disagreement. Anne explained that Camilla had repeatedly questioned Catherine's strength, not her schedule, not her workload, but her ability to carry the responsibilities that awaited her as the future queen. People familiar with the conversation claimed Camilla had described Catherine as being too fragile to stand beside William in the years ahead. Then came another remark. According to Anne, Camilla believed that the public sympathy for Catherine had elevated her above the institution itself. For several long moments, Catherine said nothing. She had spent years raising 3 children, carrying enormous public expectations, standing in the spotlight and preparing for the role she would one day inherit beside William. Yet the words that shook her most did not come from newspaper headlines or online critics. They came from within her own family. William turned toward Anne and asked the question everyone in the room was thinking. Had Camilla spoken these words only once during a heated moment, or had she been saying them for months? Anne answered without hesitation. It was a pattern. Those 3 words changed the entire tone of the meeting. Anne explained that several members of staff had heard different versions of the same message. Catherine, they believed, was becoming too influential. Her popularity, in their view, needed to be carefully managed. Some even argued that the attention surrounding Catherine risked overshadowing the reign of the current monarch. While a few comments could have been dismissed as harmless opinions, others were impossible to ignore. Anne then placed several briefing documents on the table. The concern, she explained, had extended beyond private conversations. Discussions about Catherine's public appearances had repeatedly included proposals to reduce her visibility. Her speaking time had been shortened. Her position in official photographs had been adjusted. Engagement schedules had been quietly changed without any clear explanation. At the time, Catherine accepted every alteration, believing they were ordinary administrative decisions. Now looking back, each change seemed connected to something much larger. Camilla defended herself. She insisted that genuine concern for Catherine's health and the pressure she faced had been misinterpreted as hostility. Anne remained calm. She simply reminded everyone present that she had previously warned Camilla in private to avoid making remarks that could be seen as disrespectful or insulting toward Catherine. According to Anne, that warning had been ignored. King Charles appeared genuinely surprised. He admitted he had heard concerns about Catherine's workload, but not the kind of language Anne was now describing. William, however, became visibly angrier. Someone he believed had been influencing important decisions while concealing the most damaging comments. Anne then revealed another statement that had deeply disturbed several members of staff. According to her, Camilla had suggested that Catherine might one day need to be replaced. Catherine lowered her eyes. The issue was no longer about protecting her health. It was about influence, authority, and the growing concern that the future queen was becoming more popular than anyone inside the institution had anticipated. Before we continue, we'd love to hear your opinion. Do you believe Princess Anne was right to tell Catherine the truth? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe Catherine deserved honesty rather than silence, please like this video, share it with another royal watcher, and subscribe to the channel. According to Anne, there was still one final revelation to make. This time, it involved Princess Diana. The question was no longer whether Catherine had become one of the monarchy's most admired figures. Instead, it was whether that admiration truly belonged to Catherine, or whether she was simply living in the shadow of a woman the public had never stopped loving. Anne admitted that repeating those words was one of the hardest things she had ever done. By then, Catherine already sensed what was coming. William moved a little closer to his wife. Camilla fixed her eyes on Anne. Charles remained silent. And despite already fighting back tears, Catherine realized the most painful part of the conversation had yet to begin. Anne looked directly at her, preparing to repeat the words that would forever change the atmosphere inside that room. Long before that private meeting at Windsor, tensions had already been building behind palace walls. As Catherine gradually returned to public life, the response from the public exceeded nearly everyone's expectations. Crowds gathered wherever she appeared. Families called out her name. Children reached out just to greet her. By the end of every engagement, photographs of her smiles and gestures dominated newspaper headlines. It wasn't attention Catherine had ever asked for. It came naturally after the public watched her endure difficult personal challenges while continuing to protect her family and fulfill her royal duties. To many people, her return felt deeply personal, not theatrical, not staged, simply genuine. And that authenticity earned something few institutions can manufacture: trust. Everyone seemed pleased by the overwhelming public response. King Charles welcomed the warmth shown toward Catherine. William and Catherine continued carrying out their duties side by side, standing beside Catherine at official engagements. Camilla smiled for the cameras. Yet behind closed doors, a very different conversation was taking place. Questions quietly circulated through private offices. Why was every appearance by Catherine dominating the headlines? Why were Charles and Camilla's engagements receiving noticeably less media attention? Why could a single wave from Catherine generate more public emotion than an entire week of official announcements? No one openly admitted to feeling jealous. They didn't have to. The changes were subtle enough to pass unnoticed. At one reception, Catherine's speaking time was unexpectedly reduced. At another engagement, her position beside the king was quietly changed. A briefing memo that once referred to her as the future queen suddenly described her only as a senior member of the royal family. Her office was told the wording had simply been updated for consistency. Catherine accepted the explanation without question. That made it easier for the pattern to continue. When an engagement schedule arrived unusually late, she assumed it was nothing more than a logistical delay. When photographers positioned her farther away from William than originally planned, she politely complied. When details approved by the Wales household were changed at the last minute, she never demanded an explanation. She believed the palace was simply balancing public expectations while maintaining stability. But someone else was paying much closer attention. Princess Anne had spent decades inside the institution. She understood the difference between ordinary administrative adjustments and deliberate strategic decisions. She noticed when staff members became unusually cautious around Catherine. She noticed when private secretaries who once responded directly suddenly became distant. More importantly, she kept hearing the same phrase repeated in different conversations: public sympathy. Anne first heard those words during a quiet lunch with a palace aide. The assistant spoke carefully, explaining that Camilla had privately expressed concern that public sympathy for Catherine was beginning to alter the balance within the monarchy. Anne listened without interrupting. Then she asked a simple question. "Was that said in anger?" The assistant shook their head. "No, it was said quite calmly." Anne never forgot that answer. Several days later, another staff member described a separate conversation. This time, the wording was even stronger, according to that source. Camilla believed the public had started viewing Catherine as the emotional heart of the royal family. That level of popularity, she reportedly warned, could become dangerous. Once again, Anne asked whether the concern had been about Catherine's health or the pressure of her workload. Again, the answer was no. It was about influence. Even then, Anne refused to rush to conclusions. She understood how stories could change as they moved through palace corridors. A careless remark could grow into an exaggerated rumor. An emotional comment could lose its original meaning. So she waited. She observed. She compared every conversation with the changes she was seeing around Catherine. Then a third account emerged. This time, it came from a senior aide responsible for organizing official appearances. According to that source, instructions had been given to rebalance public attention. Catherine, they were told, should not always remain at the center of major engagements. Her public remarks should be shorter. References to the future of the monarchy should be limited so that the king's reign remained the primary focus. Camilla's name never appeared in those formal instructions, but the language closely mirrored the private comments Anne had already heard. At that moment, Anne stopped treating the matter as simple palace gossip. Rumors disappear, patterns leave evidence. She began connecting every piece together. The shortened speeches, the altered photo arrangements, the delayed schedules, the revised briefing notes, the gradual removal of language connecting Catherine to the monarchy's future. Each decision could be justified on its own. Taken together, however, they suggested something much more deliberate. Someone wasn't merely reacting to Catherine's growing popularity. Someone appeared to be managing it. Throughout all of this, Catherine remained completely unaware. She continued arriving at engagements fully prepared. She greeted staff warmly. She stood beside Camilla with the same respect she had always shown in public. Later, that would become one of the most painful realizations. While Catherine continued demonstrating loyalty to the institution, private conversations were quietly questioning her strength, her future, and even her place within the monarchy. Anne knew she faced a difficult choice: speak too early, and the palace could dismiss everything as misunderstanding and rumor. Wait too long, and private opinions might quietly evolve into official policy. Then one document changed everything, buried within a routine briefing paper. Discussing continuity and ceremonial balance was a recommendation regarding Catherine's future role. The proposal suggested reducing her visibility at certain official events, while the palace reassessed how much public attention should be directed toward the Wales household. Near the bottom of the page, 4 simple words caught Anne's attention: control public sympathy. She read the phrase twice. In that instant, the private conversations she had heard finally connected with the official paperwork placed before her. The whispers were no longer remaining behind closed doors. They were beginning to shape real decisions. Anne quietly folded the briefing paper, slipped it into a blue folder, and walked away without drawing attention to herself. The palace had weathered rumors before, but documents with names, dates, and written recommendations were far more difficult to dismiss. Rather than confronting anyone immediately, Anne decided to move carefully. She began by speaking privately with a senior household assistant. She asked only one question. Were the concerns about Catherine's popularity really about her health, or were they about her influence? The assistant paused before answering. Her influence. That single word confirmed Anne's growing suspicion. A second conversation followed during a private lunch with another palace staff member. This employee recalled hearing Camilla remark that Catherine had become the central figure in the public's emotional connection to the monarchy. Not because Catherine sought attention, because the public gave it to her willingly. According to the employee, Camilla believed that kind of affection would eventually become impossible to control. Anne requested the exact wording. The staff member repeated 3 separate phrases: too fragile, too protected by public sympathy, and already receiving too much attention for someone whose future role has not yet begun. 3 different remarks, 3 conversations, yet they all pointed in the same direction. Anne didn't write any of them down. She didn't need to. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. Catherine's health was no longer the real subject of these discussions. The conversation had shifted toward power, influence, timing. Still, Anne wanted absolute certainty. She spoke with a third individual, someone directly involved in organizing family events. This account connected the private remarks to actual palace decisions. The employee explained that pressure had been placed on planners to reduce the number of occasions where Catherine appeared beside King Charles. Officially, the explanation was balance. Unofficially, another concern kept resurfacing. Every time Catherine stood beside the king, cameras naturally focused on her. Every time she spoke, headlines followed. Every time she appeared alongside William, public attention shifted toward the future rather than the present reign. That, according to the employee, was the real concern. At that moment, Anne reached her conclusion. The issue had never truly been Catherine's health. It was Catherine's growing influence. Before involving either William or Catherine, Anne decided she needed to speak directly with Camilla herself. She waited until the end of a planning meeting. The room had emptied. The staff had left. No one else remained within earshot. Choosing her words carefully, Anne did not accuse Camilla of jealousy. She knew that would end the conversation before it even began. Instead, she asked a straightforward question. Did you describe Catherine as too fragile for a greater role within the monarchy? Camilla answered that her private remarks had been misunderstood. Anne repeated the question. Did you say it? Camilla responded that someone needed to acknowledge the enormous pressure Catherine was facing, particularly while public sympathy continued growing beyond the usual expectations placed on members of the royal family. She argued that difficult conversations were sometimes necessary to protect the institution. Anne's expression never changed. She answered calmly. There is a difference between expressing concern for Catherine and speaking about her as though she is a problem that needs to be managed. Camilla pushed back. She suggested Anne was allowing personal loyalty to cloud institutional judgment. According to Camilla, the public's affection for Catherine had reached a level where it could no longer be ignored. Popularity, she argued, was not the same as authority. Public sympathy did not automatically prepare someone for the responsibilities of the crown. Emotion, she insisted, could never be allowed to govern the monarchy. To Anne, those words settled the matter. This was no misunderstanding. It reflected a genuine belief. Anne responded with a direct warning. Catherine's health must never be used as evidence of weakness. Princess Diana's memory must never be used as a weapon. And private opinions about Catherine should never be allowed to influence official decisions affecting the Wales household. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Finally, Camilla broke the silence. She accused Anne of being overly protective. Anne offered no further response. She simply turned and walked away. She believed the warning had been delivered clearly. Unfortunately, it changed nothing. No apology reached Catherine's office. None of the briefing documents were corrected. No instructions were withdrawn. Life inside the palace continued, as though the conversation had never happened. Then Anne heard another report. A staff member claimed to have overheard part of a private discussion after the confrontation. According to that account, Camilla remarked that Catherine's role would still need to be carefully managed before William assumed greater responsibilities. She also suggested that Anne had become too personally involved. The warning had failed. Then came one final statement. The staff member hesitated before repeating it. Diana. The name alone told Anne everything she needed to know. According to the account, Camilla implied that Catherine's public influence did not truly belong to her. Instead, it was being strengthened by the public's lasting affection for Princess Diana. That the admiration surrounding Catherine had been borrowed. That it was temporary. That once the palace restored the proper balance, much of that support would fade. Even before hearing the final sentence, Anne understood exactly where the conversation was leading. The implication was unmistakable. Catherine was simply living in Diana's shadow. That was the line Anne knew she could no longer keep to herself. Private conversations had achieved nothing. Quiet warnings had achieved nothing. Silence had achieved nothing. No matter how painful the truth might be, Catherine deserved to hear it directly. Anne made her decision. At the next private meeting in Windsor, once the formal business had concluded, she would close the blue folder and tell Catherine everything. The meeting at Windsor began like so many others. The agenda focused on routine matters, coming engagements, public messaging, and the responsibilities awaiting the royal family in the months ahead. Everything about the discussion felt ordinary. That normality only made what happened next even more unsettling. Catherine took her seat beside William. King Charles sat at the head of the table. Camilla opened a folder filled with briefing papers. Anne remained unusually quiet. She listened. She observed. She waited. Only after the palace secretary finished reviewing the schedule and quietly left the room did Anne make her move. The door clicked shut behind him. The room fell silent. Anne placed her blue folder on the table. Just as Charles prepared to move on to the next item, Anne spoke. There is something Catherine needs to hear. Her voice was calm, measured. There was no anger in her tone. Yet every person at the table immediately understood that the meeting had changed. Catherine looked toward Anne. William instinctively leaned forward. Camilla remained perfectly still. Anne chose to begin with the least painful part. She explained that concerns had repeatedly been raised about the amount of public attention Catherine was receiving. Not once, not twice, but over a sustained period. According to Anne, some believed that events intended to highlight the current reign were increasingly being overshadowed by Catherine's popularity. Catherine responded quietly, "I never asked for that attention." "I know," Anne replied, "and that's precisely the point." She continued, "The concern was never simply about publicity. It was about influence. Some inside the institution," Anne explained, believed Catherine's growing prominence was arriving too soon. There had even been discussions suggesting that she should become less visible until the palace could regain control of the public narrative. William's expression hardened, who suggested that. Without answering immediately, Anne opened the blue folder and removed a briefing paper. The language had been carefully written, professional, measured, but its meaning was unmistakable. Rebalance public attention. Review future ceremonial positioning. Reduce the prominence of the Wales household where appropriate. Catherine accepted the document with trembling hands. She read each sentence carefully. For months, she had believed every late schedule change, every shortened speech, every altered seating arrangement had been nothing more than routine administrative adjustments. Now placed side by side, they formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. Camilla spoke first. She insisted the documents were being interpreted as personal attacks when they were nothing more than standard planning discussions. Every royal household, she argued, regularly reviewed issues such as visibility timing and ceremonial balance. No single member, Camilla said, can become larger than the institution itself. William turned toward her. Were these decisions influenced by Catherine's health? Camilla answered that any responsible planner would naturally consider someone's recovery workload and public expectations. Catherine looked directly at her. So, my role was reduced because of that. No role was reduced, Camilla replied. The adjustments were made to protect you. Anne quietly closed the folder. The word being used wasn't protection. The atmosphere inside the room tightened instantly. Charles finally intervened. He admitted he had approved scheduling changes based on workload and ceremonial balance, but he insisted he had never been told that anyone was privately questioning Catherine's strength or suitability for her future role. William wasn't reassured. If anything, the king's response made the situation even more troubling. Somewhere between private conversations and official briefings, the truth had been filtered. Personal opinions had become administrative decisions, without Charles ever hearing the full story. Camilla denied there had been any organized effort against Catherine. She described the discussions as difficult but necessary conversations about preserving stability within a monarchy facing unprecedented public scrutiny. Anne responded with a single question: who decided where the boundaries should be? Camilla didn't answer. Her silence spoke louder than any explanation. For the first time that afternoon, Catherine lowered her head. A tear slipped quietly down her cheek. Then another. It wasn't one remark that finally broke her composure. It was the realization that every unexplained change over the past several months now carried an entirely different meaning. Every altered schedule, every carefully managed photograph, every moment she had wondered whether she had somehow done something wrong. William gently moved his chair closer to hers. Before anyone could speak again, Anne raised a hand. There is still more. The room became completely still. Anne revealed that the conversations had not focused only on Catherine's present role. They had also reached into the future. According to Anne, Camilla had suggested that if circumstances changed, Catherine might one day need to be replaced. The words echoed across the room. Catherine's eyes filled once again. Charles turned immediately toward Camilla. "Explain that." Camilla replied that the remark had referred to constitutional possibilities, not personal humiliation. Anne calmly disagreed. There was nothing constitutional about the language that was used. Then she turned back toward Catherine. The hardest part still remains. This time, it involved Diana. Anne deliberately slowed her voice. No one interrupted. No one attempted to redirect the conversation. The discussion had moved beyond scheduling, beyond protocol, beyond ceremonial balance. It had become deeply personal. The name Diana had followed Catherine from the day she first appeared beside William. For years, she had been compared to the late Princess of Wales, sometimes as a compliment, sometimes as a burden. Now Anne prepared to repeat the one sentence she had hoped she would never have to say aloud. Slowly, Catherine lifted her eyes. William reached for her hand, not to interrupt Anne, but to make sure Catherine wouldn't face the next words alone. Anne repeated the comment exactly as she had heard it. According to Camilla, Catherine was simply living in Diana's shadow. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Catherine broke. The tears she had fought to hold back finally came. It wasn't merely Diana's name that hurt. She had lived with those comparisons for years. What shattered her was the implication behind the remark, that every act of kindness, every cheering crowd, every headline celebrating her return, every expression of public affection had never truly belonged to her. According to the comment Anne had repeated, it had all been borrowed, temporary, unearned.